What if one uninvited step could cost you your life, but your silence could cost thousands theirs? Today in the Biblical Film Room, we rewind the moment when Esther walks into a throne room without permission and changes history with assertive faith. This isn't reckless courage. It's prepared, prayerful, perfectly timed boldness. Stay with me, because your moment to speak might be closer than you think. Hey, welcome back to the Biblical Film Room, where we slow the tape down, replay the moments, and study scripture like game film. So we don't just admire faith, we learn how to execute it. My name is Michael Jerome, and I want to thank you for being here today and joining us on this episode of the Biblical Film Room. Please hit that subscribe button so that you do not miss an episode. I know I have a couple of new female listeners here today. I want to thank you for joining us today, and please continue to be with us so that you also won't miss another episode. So we're in week 2 of our Badass Women of the Bible series. That's right, badass. Beautiful, assertive, devoted, anointed, strong, and sent. This week, we're talking about assertive faith. Not loud faith, not the reckless faith, but a faith that steps forward when silence would feel safer. Our focus today is Esther, a woman who risked her life with one uninvited step and changed history. But before we dive into that, I want to go back to a moment in time, an exciting sports moment in women's college basketball. There was a woman named Morgan Williams, I believe. She was a point guard, played for the Mississippi State Bulldogs, and she led a major upset over the 3-time defending champion UConn Huskies in the 2017 national semis. And I actually watched the last part of that game. It was widely considered the biggest upset in women's college basketball history. And Morgan took the last shot. She fearlessly drove to the lane, stopped, shot a floater, a tough floater over a larger player, and sank the shot at the buzzer, ending UConn's 111-game winning streak. 111 games. And she didn't shrink back from the moment. Sure, she had a little nerves, but she stepped into it. And so now back to our story in Esther. We're gonna set the scene here. I like chess, and I grew up playing chess. Wasn't very good, but I enjoyed it a lot. So like a game of chess, let's set the board before we study the moves. So Esther lives in the Persian Empire, and we read about that in her becoming queen in chapter 2. And the Jews are scattered and politically vulnerable. And that was a big deal. And then they had this powerful official named Haman who engineers a legal genocide approved by the king himself. And that's in Esther 3. And so a data set, a decree is sealed, and a people are marked for destruction. Scary situation. Now, enter Mordecai, Esther's cousin and guardian, who sends a word to her. He basically says, you are in the palace for a reason. You're there for a reason, for a purpose. So here's a film room note. Crisis often reveals calling, right? Many people find their life's calling through some kind of life crisis. I know I found my calling as a biblical faith-based counselor, relationship counseling through a crisis of a failed marriage, and you might be doing something in your life or know someone is doing something that they're very passionate about, that they feel called to do because of some kind of crisis. And that's what crises tend to do. It reveals a calling. And I think it did that for these individuals in the story that we'll see. Okay. And so, but obviously there's risk. So here's what makes this moment critical in terms of Mordecai saying, hey, you need to go talk to the king because we're going to be destroyed. No one approaches the king uninvited, not advisors, not leaders, and not even the queen. I mean, if you step forward without being summoned and the golden scepter being extended to you, you can be executed on the spot. And Esther actually explains this clearly. She understands the cost. You see her dialogue there in chapter 4, which brings me to this point. Assertive faith is not ignorance of danger. It's just clarity about it, really. It's not ignoring the danger. Just have some clarity about it. Say, well, I know there's this challenge in front of me. Pretty clear of the challenge, but I feel like I need to step into this. This is not impulsive bravery, like diving into a cold pool on January 1st. It's not that. This is informed courage, kind of like counting the costs, because there was a cost to be counted. But then Mordecai sends back one of the most powerful challenges in Scripture, a very important statement that he makes. And so he says in chapter 4, verse 12 through 14, "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish." And here's the famous line that everybody knows in the book of Esther. "Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Yep, Esther 4, verse 14. Yep, for such a time as this. That line reframes everything. It reframes everything, the thought process. In other words, not why is this happening, but why am I here now? Which is a great way to reframe when we have questions about things that's going on in our lives, struggles, hardships, challenges. Not why is this happening, but rather why am I here now? What's God up to? And here's a film room principle on this. Assertive faith asks purpose questions, not comfort questions. It asks questions that promote your purpose and why you're here, not questions, emotional questions that gives no logical answers that leaves you stuck. And here's the backdrop of this story. The book of Esther is the only book that does not mention God by name. However, you see God's fingerprints all over this story as we go through this story. So Esther comes with a decision. She has to come to a decision. And she responds with a plan, not panic. She responds with a plan. She calls for a 3-day fast. She gathers spiritual support, tell everybody to come together and pray, fast, and she prepares before she approaches. Prepares her heart with passing prayer, sending back word to Mordecai. And then she says the line that defines assertive faith. Another very, very popular line in the book of Esther, and I would say one of the more popular lines in the Bible. She says, "I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." What a line. There was a church that I went to many, many years ago, a few decades ago, actually. And there was this guy that would love to sing, and he would sing this song. And I love to sing. I think I'm okay at it. I'm probably going to sing a little bit right here, this song that he would sing. And it goes something like this. "If I perish, let me perish. Going, I'm going, I'm going. I'm going, I'm going, I'm going to see the King, to see the King." Now, sure, Esther wasn't singing this line. She wasn't that excited about going. But notice what she doesn't say or what she doesn't do. She doesn't claim guaranteed success. There was no name it, claim it. Okay? It was none of that. She doesn't demand certainty. And she doesn't wait for safer conditions. It wasn't like, well, let's make sure the king's in a good mood before I approach him. maybe I can send word to have, send the king some wine. He can get drunk. No, it wasn't any of that. I mean, she moves with surrendered resolve. That's what it looks like. A surrendered resolve. Hey, I'm going to go see the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish. The assertive faith is not certainly of outcome, but it is certainly of obedience. It's not certainly of outcome, but it is certainly of obedience. And my personal study of Scripture has shown that God honors great faith. He honors great faith. He honored Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's faith. They didn't have certainty of their outcome. They said, the God we serve is able to save us, and He will save us. But even if He doesn't, we're going to tell you, King, that we're not going to bow down to your gods. They were certain that, hey, we're going to obey regardless of the outcome. And you see the same thing in Esther. So now let's look at the approach. So in chapter 5, Esther steps into the inner court. No invitation, no protection, and no backup plan. Wow. It's like, I don't have a backup plan. Man, I didn't even get an invitation. I have no protection at all. There's no army around me. But she goes anyway. And the king extends the golden scepter. Whew. Relief. Here's what he says. What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you. Favor meets faith in motion. That's what I see here. Favor meets faith in motion. Like I said, God's name's not mentioned, but man, you see God's favor meeting the faith that's in motion of all these individuals, Mordecai, Esther, the people who were praying and fasting. And this matters because God's provision often appears after the faithful step, not before it. I mean, consider this. I mean, if she stays silent, history changes for the worse. But because she steps forward, history changes for the better for all the Jews for centuries. And so hopefully what's not lost in the stories you read on in chapter 7 is the strategy of assertive faith that you see here. Esther, she doesn't blurt everything out at once. She invites the king and Haman to a banquet, kind of like a setup. Eating good food, good wine. And then she invites them to another banquet, a second banquet. She is bold, but she is also wise. You see, assertive faith is not reckless speech, just blurting everything out. First moment, panic. It is timed truth. And that's what you see, and that is what was needed. And so a film room takeaway here. Courage speaks. I mean, eventually, courage goes ahead and says what needs to be said. Wisdom times the speech. Yeah, wisdom times the speech. Because it's all about timing when you say certain things to people, right? Because you want them to receive it. So courage speaks, wisdom times the speech, and then faith just trusts the process. Faith just sits back and let them receive what you have to say and trust the process. And you know what? At the right moment, at the right time, Esther reveals the plot. Hey, this Haman guy, I mean, there's a plot to massacre all the Jews in the province. She names the enemy. She says this vile Haman is the perpetrator of this. And she exposes the injustice. She then talks about how morally wrong this plot is. So she reveals the plot, she names the enemy, and she exposes the injustice. That's outstanding. And there's a lot that we can learn from her and just those things that we see and how she kind of just revealed everything. And then there was a reversal. It's kind of like football. You have this team, they're running right, another sweep right. And then the next play, they run right, and then they toss it to a guy coming left. A reverse. Defense is going one way, the reverse is going the other way. That's what happens here. The reversal by the king. It was a great call by the king, actually. The decree is countered. He says, against the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed, I'm going to repeal this. And the enemy falls, who's Haman. The gallows that he had built to hang Mordecai on, They said, hey, no, go out and hang him on it. And all the people, all the Jewish people in the province were saved. One woman's faith turns a national death sentence into deliverance. How about that? Not by force, not by might, not by volume. It wasn't hundreds and hundreds of people shouting and storming the castle, but by faithful boldness. A woman with faithful boldness. That's what happened. So let's bring this off the page and into our lives. Let's make some personal application as we wrap up. First, for the women, hey, assertive faith is not unspiritual. And what I mean is we have to assert our faith, women, in spaces where we might feel like we normally don't. Speaking up when you need to speak up, which brings me to the next point, application for women. Speaking when God positions you is not rebellion, it's obedience. And so there's a couple places God has positioned you. If you're married, God has positioned you in your home to speak to your husband. Sometimes he needs to hear it. So God has positioned you to say something, say what needs to be said about leadership, about whatever. And that's not rebellion. That's being obedient. And also sometime in your church, speaking to things that need to be said. And the last point is, you are not called to shrink when truth needs a voice. One of the biggest voices, I would say, in church spaces that we need are the voices of women, particularly towards leadership that is predominantly male leadership. We need women voices because sometimes in the men's leadership, it can be an echo chamber. You're just hearing men that think like you, look like you, talk like you, same age group, in some spaces, some churches, same race, all of that. And you need a different voice. And I've been I actually was in a church position where all the men, the leaders, same voice. And I asked them, hey, do you guys ever consider inviting a couple of the women to these meetings? Because this can kind of feel like an echo chamber. And sometimes it's good to hear women voices on some of these topics because the decisions you're making is not only impacting men, and it's not only impacting men of your age group, is that impacting all kinds of people, women and teens and everybody. So we need your women to not shrink when truth needs a voice. I'm working with a teenage girl who needs to speak up, and I hope she's listening to this podcast. There's something with the teen leader that she's kind of afraid to say, and I challenge her, hey, you need to not shrink back. You need to go ahead and speak into that situation. Okay, for the men, please, men, honor and receive courageous voices around you, whether they're women, other men in your life, even your kids. Honor and receive courageous voices around you because sometimes it takes courage to say certain things to certain men. And so please honor that, receive that, be open to that. Another takeaway, Mordecai, he didn't control Esther, but he called her higher. He called her up. And men, we don't need to be in control the women of our lives, whether it's our spouse or our daughters. We just need to call them higher in love, inspire them higher. That's what Mordecai did for Esther. And thirdly, strong faith communities that I've really seen and been a part of empower courage across gender. Empower courage across gender. Again, giving women the opportunity to speak, like Acts chapter 6. When there was an issue with the women that were being overlooked, man, the 12 empowered the women and the people who were being overlooked to say something about that. And so strong faith communities empower courage across gender. And I want to encourage our men to be those, particularly leaders, to be those kind of men that build those kind of churches. And for all of us, where are you being tempted to stay silent because it feels safer? Where are you being tempted to stay silent because it feels safer? A truth you need to say. Maybe a stand you need to take. Perhaps a conversation you need to initiate, like the one I referred to with this teen girl who needs to initiate a conversation with her youth leader. Or a calling. How about this? A calling you need to accept. There's a calling on your life. You need to accept it. So where are you being tempted to stay silent because it feels safer? Hey, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up, put a bow on it. This week's Film Room Challenge. Ask yourself daily, where is assertive faith required of me today? Where is assertive faith required of me today? Yesterday I was out at a coffee place in downtown Round Rock, and I saw a lady, and I went up to her. We started talking because she had a jacket on, something about her church. And then I started telling her about my podcast. And I thought, I need to assert myself. I'm doing a series on badass women of the Bible. I got to talk to people about the podcast. And sometimes I'm hesitant to share the podcast with people. And I thought, what's that all about? You're doing a series on, women of faith. What a great opportunity to invite more women. And so I invited her to listen to the podcast. And she said, I'll share it with my friend. And I was so encouraged. And I'm glad that I asserted my faith and I didn't shrink back. So again, where is assertive faith? Ask yourself every day, where is assertive faith required of me today? Then take the step you've been postponing. Take the step that you've been procrastinating on. Because really it just takes a step, taking that step. And please, I want to ask you, share this episode with someone who needs courage with wisdom. Needs courage with wisdom. Not noise, not pressure, just faithful boldness. Well, we're going to go ahead and close here. Man, I've been having fun doing this series. And we got 2 more to go. Next week, we continue the Badass Women of the Bible series with Devoted Love and Ruth. Until then, this is Michael Jerome signing off. Watch the tape, know your moment, and walk in assertive faith. Godspeed. We'll see you next week.